Hello friends, happy summer. Hope it's going well for you. My name is John Patty. Welcome back to Music in Our World. I'd like to bring for you now episode 9. It's my one of my close friends and sort of a business partner now, if you will. A colleague of mine named Robert Lewis. I met Robert when I was a teacher for a few years, and we taught in the same district. Played in a little band together. Sometimes it was a lot of fun. But he and I, we've worked together on a few musicals now, and we talk all the time about musicals and theater and education, pedagogy, all sorts of really interesting, in my opinion, interesting musical topics. So it just kind of makes sense to have him on. And the more that we talk and the more work we do together, I think he's going to be somebody that we'll have on probably more than once, maybe with a little bit of consistency. The idea here with the podcast in the current format is that it's going to maintain a pretty simple approach. So if it makes sense to have Robert on a whole bunch, I think that's probably what we're just going to do. And, maybe even as a co-host kind of thing. Today he and I we talked a little bit about theater and where it's going and what about the arts in general, and then also a little bit about our newest endeavor, the Woodlands Chamber Music Project. So I could talk about that for a really, really, really long time. So to save you that stress, I will just I'll let you kind of listen to the podcast, and then if you have any questions about what we talked about, or specifically about the chamber music group, just shoot us a message. We're definitely trying to expand that right now. So it'd be great to have all of you involved for sure. Just right up here at the top, also, I want to let you guys know that I'm booked with Zero Detail a few shows this summer. I'll put those up. Those are on my bands in town. If you click on the events page on the website, you'll be able to see that there. We're gonna play Darwin's again. They're a damn good Music Friday event. It's a really cool spot. We're gonna play Super Happy Funland, I think twice, and the Firehouse Saloon. Bigger venues. Some of those do have tickets though, so if you check out a show and want to go, just let me know, and I'll either put you on the list or sell you a ticket, whichever one it happens to be. We're also looking for more bookings, so if you come across a festival or a show that needs another band, please let us know. We're definitely looking for that. I'm kind of taking this summer off of the musical theater stuff as far as hits goes. They're under some new leadership, and want to take the classes a little bit different direction, so I get some time to breathe before I head to Virginia to work with the wonderful Chesterfield County Schools. But yeah, if you have any questions about what I'm up to, please feel free to drop a line, and enjoy me and Robert. It always ends up starting somewhere and going somewhere else anyway.
Right.
But we can start with theater.
Sure.
In general.
Let's do that. That's been on my mind a lot recently.
Yeah, and that takes me out of my element a little bit.
Right. Well, that's the other thing, is that it is your podcast, and we don't want to wander too far off from the topic of the title.
Yeah. Well, what kind of what is the world of theater? How is that affecting your world?
So right now, so much of it is that's sort of my side job. Last year was a particularly busy year for me. This year has been a little bit less so practically, but I've been doing a lot more thinking about it, if that makes sense. So last year I did 5 overlapping shows, which was really sort of a terrible idea in some ways. It was good for my resume. It was good experience. I enjoyed, the process of each one of them. There were 5 very different shows. And then this year, I'm only on my second show at this point in the year. Last year, by this time, I was on show 3, with 2 for sure committed by this point.
Yeah.
So that's been, sort of my big thing. And I guess I should say, I'm not this is the first show that I'm going to be on stage for. I've been in the back directing for the most part for the last couple of years has been my thing. So I'm already sort of coming into things thinking conceptually, rather and sort of a combination of conceptual and practical, sort of big picture stuff, as opposed to, coming in as an actor, as a singer, where it's really about doing, a sort of specific job and fitting in and building that community, working with the other actors. I've found myself sort of deliberately stepping back from that in a way. And that's what's going to make this show really interesting, is because I have to sort of do both. I'm not only doing the music directing job where I'm teaching the harmony and figuring out how to make it work and doing all that, but I'm going to be on stage as of now, unless we find a bunch more guys, which is unlikely at this point. I'm going to be on stage actually dancing and singing along, as well as doing the teaching part.
So is that, I don't know, we've talked a little bit about it, but is that an ideal thing? Are you trying to step away from performance completely in that regard, or just whatever it calls for?
For me, I would much rather have the arrangement we had in Spelling Bee. That's sort of my ideal, where I'm in the rehearsals. I may or may not be at the piano at that point, and I'm in the pit, sort of helping create the show, but not necessarily doing the building a character, doing the costume and the acting and all of that. I've drifted away since high school, really enjoying that part of it. I started in theater as an actor. And my theater and my music were separate for a couple of years. When I got into junior high, junior highs don't do musicals typically, or at least mine didn't. And so my first 4 or 5 shows were plays. Over the course of 2 years there, fall show, spring show. I didn't do a musical until I was a sophomore in high school. Now I knew at that point that I wanted to do musicals, and I knew that I liked the repertoire. I started looking at musical theater songs when I was in 8th grade with my voice teacher a little bit. And all through high school, I did a musical theater singing contest. But the actual act of doing singing and acting in the context of a show, I didn't do until, like the fall of my sophomore year of high school. And so that was So I came in. I had what I mean to say is I had that acting training. Yeah. My freshman year of high school, I specifically remember we did a pretty in-depth study of the Stanislavski method, which is one of the sort of basic schools of acting, and that one is grounded in realism. And then there's been a couple of other methods that have come along since then that I don't know nearly as well, that are grounded in sort of theatrical realism. That makes sense. The kind of thing where it makes sense to not only interact with someone on stage like it's a real person, but also to occasionally make grand gestures that are effective to the audience, but are not necessarily something that you would actually do, sitting here in, a room.
Yeah.
So I did that, and, I did choir and theater all through high school, and I did musicals, and I did community theater and all that. And then toward the end of high school and going into college, I sort of drifted into the director role a little bit more, and the keyboard role. I played keyboard for my first show, and that was my only responsibility, was playing keyboard. And that was for a production of Songs for New World, which has a ridiculous keyboard part, and I'm still not entirely sure how I managed to learn it. So I did that, and that was my first time really being involved with the show, but not being on stage. And in fact, for 3 of the 5 performances, I was completely hidden from the audience. I was behind a wall, completely backstage. And then the other 2 performances, I was kind of off to the side. Then, as a result of that, and sort of just them discovering that I could play piano and that I enjoyed the teaching side of things, because I knew by then, as I was graduating high school, so I was on my way to college, I was going to do music education, I knew all of that. And so the theater that I was working with, which at the time was Houston Family Arts Center, now Stageworks, they asked me to come in and teach one of their kids' summer camps. And you've seen these kind of things with the kind of things that you've worked with. Yeah. You've seen sort of the end product from your work with hits. But essentially, it was 3 weeks of full day, 9 to 3 kind of thing.
Yeah.
And at the end of the week, starting Thursday of the last week, we had performances. And at the time, the stuff that they were doing, I think this is the kind of stuff that's really good for kids at that age, from my experience. 45 minutes to an hour of show, and that's really plenty. Because it gives you enough so that you're not constantly doing the same little thing all the time. If it's a 20-minute show, there's not a whole lot that you can do.
Right.
But it was big enough that there was a clear story arc. There were, today we're going to work on this scene and that. But it was small enough that we didn't lose attention. It was, once we started stringing it together, it was kind of easy to keep the kids sort of corralled and say, all right, now you only have 5 minutes before you go back on stage, rather than you have 25 minutes because there's that much more story.
Yeah.
So that was sort of my summer job for several years, 2010, 11, 12, maybe 13. I don't remember now. I think 2013 was the last year that I did it, because that was before my junior year. And after that, they changed hands, and the new management didn't know me, and I was, of course, out of town in college, and so I was just never asked to come back. That was really, it wasn't like there was a big breakup or anything like that.
Yeah.
So that was how I sort of got some experience with that teaching and that directing. And at the time, I was doing a fair amount of piano stuff, though all of those shows were done with tracks, so I wasn't accompanying very much. And then the way I actually got into full-scale music directing, what I'm doing now, was the weirdest fluke. My second year teaching, when I moved out to Magnolia, we have a voice teacher who comes in and teaches for us twice a week, and she has ties to the theater that I work with now, the Players Theater Company in Conroe. At the time, she was either officially or unofficially on the play selection committee for them. She was friends with the director that was doing the next big musical, that kind of thing. And so I think this was within 24 hours of me meeting her, I was connected with him and doing that show. It was really, we just kind of got to talking, and it was kind of, hi, how are you? And at some point, I don't know if she talked about musicals first or I did. And she said, oh, they're looking for a vocal guy to do Meet Me in St. Louis out there. They have a music guy, but he's not a vocalist, and they'd really like someone to come in and have that expertise. And I was like, let me talk to the director, but maybe so. And at the time, I was actually looking at auditioning for another show where I would have been on stage and playing. It's a odd little show called Closer Than Ever that I'd recently fallen in love with. I learned about it in college. And the way that show is cast, it's 3 men, 2 women, and one of the men plays piano for the whole show.
Okay.
And gets a couple of character bits and a couple of songs to himself, but he's also the orchestra.
Huh.
So I was like, I could do that. Never mind the fact that the character's supposed to be in his mid-30s, and I was 23 or whatever at the time. Anyway, so I'd actually contacted that director, but Carol, the director for the Players, she called me. We talked. It sounded like it was going to be interesting. It looked like a lot of fun, and she was willing to give me a shot. And so I signed on, sight unseen. I knew we were doing Meet Me in St. Louis. I didn't know the show. I'd never seen the movie. I'd never met Carol. I'd never been to the theater. I'd never met Sal, who was the conductor at the time. Any of that. I was going to miss the first round of auditions. The way that it worked out, I had just joined a traveling choir that I've sung with a few times. I'm not sure when the next time I'm going to be able to make it for them is. But anyway, we were doing a get together. It was my first time with them. We were going to be in Chicago for a weekend in September, and so auditions were were they just Saturday? They may have been Saturday, Sunday, or Sunday. I don't remember. Anyway, I was coming back the day of the second day of auditions, and so I said, I'm not going to be able to be there. So I showed up at callbacks, and I didn't know any of the actors. I didn't know what they'd done in their first round. None of that. I got the script. I started looking at it. I thought, this is very strange. It's got the melodies in that show are very weird. I met Sal, I met Carol. I mean, it was kind of a whirlwind.
Yeah.
All of these things happened very quickly. And it was a really good experience, ultimately. It ended up being the kind of thing. Carol and I are easygoing in some ways and very insistent on getting our way in other ways, but they balance each other out well. Sal, I learned in that show how to work with him because he thinks about music very differently because he's coming from a band orchestra perspective. So like I learned from that show, I learned that I needed to pretty much be ready to give him specific metronome markings throughout, and then this is about here and, play a little bit, it's like, just give me 72 and this is 80 and this is 100, And so after that, there are our later shows I've done that. But it was just really worked well. And I enjoyed the cast. The cast apparently liked me. I got a lot of compliments from it. And I was really happy. That was a show where most of the cast was older than me, and it was my first time working with adults. All the shows that I had done prior had either been youth shows or teen shows. Yeah. So this was my first time working with a cast that literally included people up into their 60s. And so I was a little nervous about that, but everyone trusted me and went with me, and we were real happy with the result. And so since then, it just kind of progressed, working with them. Through that's where I got my CYT connection. And then that's how I, started sort of spreading around. And really every show that I've gotten since then has been as a result of my work with that company, and sort of the track record that I've built. The compliments I've gotten from cast, from working with directors, and then the sort of reputation. I have no idea how much it's impacted my being offered things, but when I won the Monty Award last year for Best Music Direction, that's pretty exciting. That same show was nominated for a Broadway World Houston Award. We didn't win. I don't remember who it went to now, but just sort of being able to put that kind of thing, on a resume or in contact with people. So that's been fun. But yeah, I could trace everything back to sort of a chain of events, starting with talking to Shan at the school, to where I am now.
Well, that's fascinating. I kind of relate to people in that way that because theater itself is kind of an amalgamation of a bunch of different things. You've got musical training, you've got to have an actor training, but then you also have to be able to talk to people and work with people from all over that may be making musical decisions and have no musical training, or vice versa about drama. So that's one of the things that I'm always curious about is, obviously in a practical sense, your musical training came from school. Some of your theater came from school as well. But what are some of the things that you think maybe prepared you to do that first gig with players?
Probably the biggest thing at that point, for sure, the biggest thing that I saw in my favor was my choral background. My voice training. My degree is in choral music. My primary instrument in college was voice, which meant that I knew from a physiological perspective what is healthy sounding, and I knew from a teaching perspective how to evoke that, and also how to bend some of that into the theater sound, because of course my training is classical, and musical theater sound is not quite the same. But I did a bunch of research. This leads into a sort of different topic, but I did a bunch of research my senior year on sort of what are the fundamental techniques that make for healthy singing regardless of what style you're going into. And ultimately that actually turned into my honors thesis. I had to write a big paper for the honors program, and I did it within my discipline, and so I don't remember the title of it. It's over on my bookshelf right now. But basically it was an exploration of how does the voice work, and what are the fundamental techniques that, like I said, that make for healthy singing that then you can go in whatever direction from there that you want. And so, understanding, especially in theater, the biggest thing that we have to deal with, and you did a little bit in high school, but especially in theater, is what's called vocal registration. And without getting too much into the sort of technical elements of it, basically it's how light or heavy of the sound that you want. So for girls, it's the difference between belting and what we in theater refer to as legit singing, the sort of more classical, head voice type thing. And head voice is one of the terms for vocal register. For guys, it's the sort of the difference between singing and shouting at the top end of your range. And then also there's that falsetto quality. So I did a lot of research into how those work. It's a wormhole.
Yeah.
No one completely understands it, but everyone kind of knows how to get what they want out of it.
Yeah.
So, like even for example, last night in callbacks for my current show, I turned to one of the singers and I said, "Can you go a little lighter here? Can you do a little bit more head voice at that spot?" And just being able to sort of ask that and know that it's doable, for one thing, and know that it's the sound that I want and how to put that into words. That was a big thing. The other thing that's not so much musical, but I think led to me gaining a lot of ground with my performers is weirdly the really rough experience I had my first year teaching.
Yeah.
Because what it led to me doing was coming into that fall of 2015 as I was starting in a new school, coming in from a much more humble place. Which is sort of contradictory. If you're going to be a director, you have to be a bit of a dictator. Sure. But it came from a place of, instead of do this, it came from a place of, all right, let's try this.
Yeah.
It's a really little thing, but that was one of the things that someone came up to me at the end of that show and she said, what I've really enjoyed about working with you is that you have high expectations, but you're really encouraging about it. It was, okay, let's try this thing a little bit different, or that was good, but now let's add this other thing. That was something that I really took away from that, and I started wondering if I'm doing that as much as a teacher. But I've definitely kept that in mind as I've worked with other shows, and I think that has definitely helped, especially when you're working with kids. With kids theater, the biggest challenge there is to be teaching, but at the same time be results focused.
Right.
I tend to get bound up in the teaching process, and we talked a little bit about this with that class that I was teaching this spring, where I wanted it to be more teaching focused, and the students were expecting it to be more performance focused, and so there was a little bit of that tension there. But I tend to come into working with kids, especially, I guess because it's what I do all day, I tend to come into that from a perspective of, all right, we're going to learn something. And whether it quite works out at the end is less important than whether we grew.
Yeah.
And I do a better job putting that away with shows. But that was definitely something. The other thing, just briefly, that I took out of Meet Me in St. Louis that I actually learned from my head director when we started doing our school production of the 25th Annual Putnam County Spelling Bee, is a willingness to be faithful to the spirit of the notes on the page without being necessarily 100% true to every single note, especially in the voice leading on vocal parts.
Yeah.
And I've learned to adapt that to the cast in a lot of ways. When we were doing that show, we were working with a lot of inexperienced singers. And so she said, all right, sopranos, I'm going to teach you a section that sounds like a melody, sounds like a soprano line. Altos, I'm going to teach you something that's very static, because that's a typical alto line. Basses, I'm going to teach you something that is almost entirely roots of chords, because that's a bass line. She didn't say that directly, but that was what she taught. And so she took what was a 3-note chord progression and sort of rewrote it she didn't ever actually write it down, but sort of rewrote it into a 4-part, more traditionally written, feel. And I actually took that and turned it immediately around into Meet Me in St. Louis. Now, when I'm working with more experienced singers or with stronger singers, so like when I redid Spelling Bee at the community theater level, I didn't do that. I did in a couple of places. I adapted things where I was like, all right, this has this character going to a high note and she's not totally comfortable there, or he would be in falsetto at that spot, or we had a couple of really strong tenors in that show.
Yeah.
And so quite often I switched the top notes between a soprano and a tenor, sort of thing. But, that was really it. And I've always felt a little bit weird about that in some ways, because if you're in a show that's really like clearly specified, that's, to me, I'm like, your first step should be to do that.
Yeah.
So if it, like when we did Cats, it's written out 4 staves: soprano, alto, tenor, bass. They're not labeled that way, but the clefs are what you would expect.
Yeah.
So on the one hand, it leaves a little bit of arguable leeway as to what's really meant, because it's not 100% clear.
Right.
But on the other hand, it's, as a choir teacher, I look at that and I go, it's 4-part open score.
Yeah.
But, with that show, again, working with a lot of inexperienced singers, I said, there's no way. We can't do 5-part harmony, which is what most of that show is, and the soprano ones are up above the staff the whole time.
Yeah.
So I did some massive rewriting for that. But with other shows, I've kept it simpler or less, sort of less dramatically messing with what appears to be to my attention on the page. And that comes from the classical music side of me, in a way. That fidelity to what did the composer write? And kind of having to balance that within the theater world. Sometimes there are obvious mistakes, sometimes there are less obvious mistakes, and sometimes there are things that are negotiable in a way. If you reach the same creative goal, so.
That kind of brings up to me the idea of, I think there is this sort of ubiquity that we all sort of go for, and having several different disciplines. I studied as a singer, as a percussionist, as a member of a band, as a band director, as a a cappella, small ensemble director. I think there is this good sound that does sort of transcend. So I think the thesis topic was really fascinating. We think of all these different ways to get that really good sound, and to put a good product. And I think that even if it's not always exactly in the clearest words, I think, can you sing lighter? You don't have to say, can you apply 25% more falsetto?
Right.
It's just an idea. And that the more, I always am fascinated by the topic of interdisciplinary things, because, in musical theater, some people combine that as one, but then you get the musical theater person who also plays saxophone in the band, or, played trombone, or sang in the church choir for 30 years. It's really not the same, but they have a good idea of like what is good, and they've been around it. So that's one of the things that's really fascinating. I'm a huge advocate for, start in an fine art young.
Right.
And if you have time in your schedule, for young folks, do more than one thing.
Right.
And even if you don't do it at a professional level, if you're in college, play in the concert band, sing in the choir, because
Absolutely.
They always need it.
Yeah, and we encourage our kids, consistently. And that's one of the things that I've really liked about our structure out at Magnolia West is we really do our best within the 2 musical disciplines, especially, to share kids nicely. We make a point of not scheduling our top ensembles opposite each other. If a kid comes to us and says, I'm looking to drop band and I want to join choir, then we don't just say, okay, let's do it. We make a point of talking to the band director and saying, this kid came up to me, that kind of thing. And we definitely encourage our students to do as much as they can as well. Piano and choir, or when we have a kid who's really interested in doing, going to college, especially if they're a band student, we strongly encourage them to, before they graduate, take at least a year of piano, a year of choir, and AP music theory. So that then they go in and they can sight read, they can sight sing vocally. They have the ear training from AP music theory plus the theory background, and they have some of that piano practical skill. So that then they go in, and even if that doesn't, we don't encourage them to skip classes when they get into college. Skip your theory 1 because you got a good grade leave. We actually encourage them to take that basic class, because there's so many adjustments when you go into college.
Yeah.
that were like, if you have two classes that are a gimme class, then when you're dealing with being homesick, when you're dealing with I have to deal with my own, I have to find my own food, I have to, I have to wash my own clothes, I have to do all these things, then that's one less thing to have to worry about as you're making all those adjustments.
Yeah.
So yeah, that interdisciplinary thing is really important. And you talked a little bit about, musical theater as in some ways being a unified thing, in some ways being sort of a combination. That's part of why I get a little bit frustrated anytime I start hearing people arguing about opera versus musical theater.
Yeah.
Is because they have far more in common than they have different.
Mm-hmm.
And I was gonna connect back for a second because I have The Rest Is Noise book here, which starts with a little bit of Wagner, but that was his whole idea. The whole total all-encompassing artwork where every element from the set design to the choreography to the music to the singing to the costumes to the space even that the audience is in contributes to the storytelling, contributes to the work, and that's and I think that really good theater and good musical theater works the same way, and that's one of the things that's really fascinating to me, to see a production like, for example, the production of West Side Story that I did last year, that was really it was really highly awarded, and that was because there was a really singular vision. The director and the choreographer really shaped that show. I didn't do a whole lot because the singing in that show is not that difficult, but the director and the choreographer really shaped that show, and they had a very particular vision for what they were going to create. And so when the director designed the set, that showed there. When they did costumes, that all of those things, the way the characters acted, the way they danced, the way they moved, who they were partnered with, all of these little details, to the point of even we actually got permission from the theater to paint graffiti on the walls outside the proscenium along the sides. Sort of like what the posters we did for Spelling Bee.
Yeah.
It was the same idea, except we actually painted. And they took the back wall of the theater that had previously been flat black with the garage doors and all of that, and painted it to look like real bricks. So you really did sort of draw the audience in that way.
Yeah.
And that was really cool. That was something, that's something that I'm really fascinated by, and we've talked a little bit about that recently. The theater as an environment and not just as a sort of playing space with the audience separate. The theater that I've always been the most fascinated by, and also kind of the most scared of as an audience member, because there's an unexpected quality, and I'm terrified of the unexpected, is that sort of interactive drawing the audience in. And if you can make the audience feel safe, and I think that they buy in more.
Yeah. Well, that's to me one of the promises of theater in general, is that it can be a little bit more immersive. I mean, there's a quality where, sometimes even like you break the fourth wall and the audience becomes part of the show.
Right.
That's not really something that's practical in a strictly musical setting or a straight play as frequently. Sometimes, but in musical theater, it's kind of like if someone's reciting a line, it can very much feel like they're not reciting it to anyone in particular, or they're just talking to the character next to them. But a lot of times musicals, you're going to have to point at the audience. It sounds like and feels like someone's singing to you, or at least at you, or in your general direction. It's very different. My time with theater has kind of shaped what I try to do whenever I have control over what's happening. When I would do a percussion concert when I was a teacher, it was like there's stuff all over the walls. There's kids waiting between the band hall, like the green room backstage, until the hallway. There's people playing. That's always that's the environment that I want to create. I always use that word, environment. It's very different from just the show, where there's a stage and an audience and a clear division, and someone waves their arms, you clap, and everyone goes home. Right. I think, we've had hundreds of years of that. I think it's... Right.
Well, and the thing that's been, I feel like is the current movement in the performing arts in general, because I'm even seeing as I read articles about musicians becoming more theatrical in a way, and yeah, trying to sort of draw the audience in and get them more involved and eliminate that fourth wall in a lot of ways. I think it can be really can make it a really powerful experience. And I've seen some of that as we've talked about some of our plans for this chamber music group that we're working on. We've talked about trying to find ways to involve the audience. And, we haven't been super experimental with it yet because we're still trying to get it off the ground, but we have some of those ideas for getting them involved. The improvisation at this last concert was a good example where the clicker then, got the audience involved, and it was a little weird. And, I talked to a couple people afterward and they were like, that was not unpleasant, but it was strange.
It's good.
But they got a kick out of being involved.
Yeah.
Being able to do that a little bit. And you do a little bit of that with your presentation at the beginning. I'm hoping that some of our future performers will do a little bit more engaging with the audience before they perform, as well. But environment and the atmosphere of a space I think is really fascinating. And the more I think about it, you're even seeing it outside of the arts in some ways. I think that the escape room thing, I haven't actually had a chance to do one. I keep wanting to, and at some point I'll post on Facebook and say, hey, anyone want to go? And see if I can find like 3 people.
Yeah.
But, that's an environment. That's an interactive, that's something different. And the environmental theater that I've gotten a chance to see, when I got to do Sleep No More back in January, was the same thing. They literally just have a 5-story building that you wander through.
Yeah. And
you may or may not ever see any actors. If you don't, it's kind of your fault because they're everywhere. But, it was 15 minutes into that thing before I saw anything happening. It was just environment. It was just the world. And that's what's always fascinated me. I've talked to people recently who are like, I'm a Disney fan. I'm like, what kind of Disney fan are you? Are you Disney princesses? Are you Disney animation? Are you some particular movie? Disney musicals, whatever. For me, my biggest fascination with Disney is the parks. And is because that's what the parks are, is world building.
Yeah.
And they go to incredible lengths to do, to build this thing that feels both real and unreal at the same time. And some of the stuff, it's incredible how some of the illusion holds up. I've been to Disney World, and you walk down Main Street right at the beginning as you walk in, and it feels kind of like an old school Main Street, even when you're surrounded by hundreds of thousands of people. Yeah. And Mickey Mouse is over there in the corner and whatever. But all of the stores have hand painted lettering, even on the second floor where there's an optometrist or a dentist or whatever, and so every detail is taken care of, which I think is just fascinating. And they make everything seem taller. I learned about forced perspective from Disney, which I think is fascinating. The castle there at Disney World the same way. It's 198 feet tall because if they made it 200 feet tall, they would have had to put a light on top of it for airplane clearance. Sure. It's 198 feet, but it feels like it's 300. Yeah. Because as you go up, the windows get smaller. Huh. So not only do they look smaller because perspective makes things look smaller, but they look even smaller than that, which makes them seem that much more distant. Those kind of things.
That makes me wonder. Stepping away from teaching full time, I've had a lot of time to develop my teaching technique, less time to apply it. I still give clinics and everything, but that makes me. Is that something that you ever consciously think about when you're teaching, like maybe the older kids, or if you're working with community theater, 20-somethings? Because I know that there's a lot of those folks doing wonderful things. Is that something you ever talk about? I know there's the find your space, fill the stage, that sort of thing, or find your light rather. But is that something you consider as, let's create this artistic environment and then move within it, or is that?
Sometimes, I do. From a practical teaching perspective, there are plenty of times when I select an activity or a next move based on where the energy in the room is and where I want it to be.
Yeah.
So, for example, the men's choir that I teach, every day, as soon as the bell rings, I start playing piano, and we start warm-ups immediately. And that creates that environment of, yes, it's energy, but we're immediately bringing it into focus. Whereas if a group comes in, some of the other groups that I've worked with, they come in and I might, when the bell rings, I might start playing piano, but I might play softly. And I might just improvise a little bit, something sort of melodic and relaxing and calming and whatever. And that, after about 30 seconds brings them down, and they sort of then they start listening and they start paying attention. Or early morning warm-ups, same thing. I start early morning warm-ups very softly. And I play softly and I play gently and it's relaxed, and then we build and we get bigger and we do all that. As far as with the actual performance part of it, I don't get to do a lot of the directing on the acting side of things, especially as I'm working with theater stuff. I really try to leave that to the director because I don't want to step on their toes and I want them to be able to implement their vision. But when I'm working with my choir kids, I definitely talk sometimes about the mood and about, the sort of feel of a song, and this is relaxed, and this is, especially if I'm trying to get them to relax, because when you teach singing, you inevitably come at things from a logical perspective. At least I do. I come from these are the notes on the page, these are the rhythms, these are the dynamics, these are the words, all those elements, and then, but at some point you do have to sort of let that go. And the thing that I always try to remember is the song is not the notes on the page. The notes on the page are the instructions, and the song is what comes out of that.
Yeah.
And so, we're doing, we were doing a piece for our UIL contest this last year, and rather than talking about the end of the piece as being loud, which it was forte fortissimo, tenors up in the highest octave they sang, and the whole thing. I talked about it being triumphant, because that's really what the mood of that moment was.
Yeah.
We're singing "Be Thou My Vision" is the last verse. High King of Heaven, my victory won. May I reach heaven's joys, O bright heaven's sun. And it's just, the whole thing just builds at that spot. And it's also a way, sort of sneakily of getting them to sing loud without pushing.
Yeah.
When it's, for me, when I think triumphant, there's sort of an almost right before the downbeat, I have to slam my foot down and ground myself, just sort of the classic opera sort of park and bark, sort of gripping onto some kind of rails down, every muscle in your body doing in that. Yeah. And that creates a kind of support, and so using terms like that, I think pulls into some of that environment. I've tried, and fortunately my coworker has been sort of open to this. We've tried playing with format sometimes in our casual concerts. The pop show being the most obvious example, where I took the model that she had developed and have sort of spun a couple of unique things on it. Or like, for example, our Christmas concert this last year, we did a four voice canon with the singers spread around the room. We had a kids choir in the front that was joining us, and then we had our girls choirs, and then we had the men's choir, and then we had the varsity mixed choir. And so we were doing a canon on Masters in This Hall. And basically we would sing each verse in unison, and then each time we would add canon. And sometimes it was canon from the left to the right of the audience, and toward the end it was front to back. So you had that sort of surrounding feel. Yeah. And we wanted to do a little bit more of that, and there was some staging that didn't quite make it into that performance. But pop music is a great way to do it, because it's usually things that the audience is familiar with. And so by doing things like having the singer sit on the edge of the stage, and even little things like that, we haven't gotten bold enough. We haven't had a long enough introduction, frankly, to have a singer come in through the audience, or a group come in through the audience like that. But the those are the kind of things that I'm interested to explore. I like the idea of surrounding, either the audience surrounding the performer or the performer surrounding the audience. I like the latter when you can, because I think it feels safer as an audience member if the performers are around you than as a performer if the audience is around you.
Yeah.
I'm thinking back to if I had played, that Prelude and Fugue that I played at our last recital, and if I had been, had people on all four sides, I would have been that much more nervous.
Yeah.
But I think as an audience member, when you're seated, when you're safe, you have your program in your hands, you have your people you came with on either side, or strangers, but you're all kind of in this together. And then there are performers moving around or among, I like that idea. That's sort of why every time I think about any kind of arena space, I think about using it that way.
Yeah.
So that was a long rambling thing, and I have no idea if I ever answered the question you actually asked.
No, definitely. And that's one of the reasons I like this format, is because it did. But there's so much to talk about it with all of this stuff.
Right.
I want to talk a little bit more about the chamber project that we've got going on. But the last thing about the kind of again, another topic that we get into a lot is pedagogy and teaching in general. But I think choir kind of lends itself to that, because you can reasonably split up your ensemble and have people around, and as long as there's some at least vague pitch center, you can get away with it. I think less so is that practical for a band or an orchestra setting, just because some instruments have to be seated or reasonably
right.
But I'm curious, and just, there may not be an answer here in this room, but I've one of the things I was trying to do is to sort of also create that environment, not necessarily have half the band sitting in the hallway between the green room and
right.
but sometimes have a flute trio on the way in, or I think it's just because these big concerted works that have 60 plus members and 25 different parts,
right,
it lends itself less. But I'm curious, and one of the cool things about this is maybe it'll start a discussion among the band world, like how do we pull some more of this in,
right,
how do we let our performers surround the audience.
Right. Well, and I think there's different ways to do it. I've definitely, like, I don't know if it was the Houston Symphony. There was some symphony that I read about that was experimenting briefly with having selected audience members actually among the performers. And obviously if you do that, you can only have like 10 in a 50-piece orchestra. But that's a unique experience for those performers for sure, or for those listeners. I think if you have a work, the model that I see in choral works where it works the best is when you have subsections. Either, like, for example, the classic, the sort of oldest examples are these antiphonal works from the Renaissance, where you literally have two choirs. That may or may not function independently. They may sometimes sing together, but there's a group that is sort of unified among itself, but distinct from the others. So, for example, if you had something that massively features, say, the brass or even the principal brass, you might be able to put them slightly separate. That kind of thing. Or if you had something that has, like you talked about, like having a small ensemble. You talked about, I think, having them as in a separate space, sort of as but I'm thinking even back to a performance that we did in college. There's a piece that they do every year as the opener to the Baylor Christmas concert that has very simply antiphonal trumpets. It had one the lead trumpet in the front, and then two muted trumpets in the back corners, and they did sort of a call and response thing. It was really simple. It was small, but it matched up with the fact that the choir was also surrounding the audience at that point. So you did have that sort of filling the whole room. And that's the other thing that I think it comes down to is, how do you effectively fill the room? Because you can do it with amplification too. To some extent. You can't necessarily get the antiphonal feel, but you can certainly, create a more consistent environment throughout the room, which is part of why I like small theaters, by the way.
Yeah.
Because it's easier to manage that. When you have, I'm thinking of even our choir concerts, you've been in the auditoriums at the Magnolia High Schools, they're deep.
Yeah.
And, the experience that you get being up in the, first 10 rows or so is completely different from the experience you get in the first 10 rows of the back section.
Yeah.
And to some extent you may want that, but, that's just a different way of thinking about it. But yeah, I like the idea of having sort of a casual music encounter, maybe superimposed with a more formal one. I actually almost did that with my piano recital this year. I had a girl who was absolutely petrified, stage fright, just the prospect of getting up even in front of her class and playing for her, she would just burst into tears and just really. She's very smart. She's really hardworking girl. She played very, very well, but she just had that sort of deep-seated terror. Mm-hmm. And so I joked with her, half seriously, about having her play while the audience was coming in. Mm-hmm. Because she could play well, and she could play well while other people in the room, as long as she didn't feel like they were necessarily.
Sure.
And we joked about it, and I sort of started thinking about the practical elements, and I was like, that feels sort of, it didn't feel like there was a way to do that and really do her hard work justice and not feel like I was singling her out in a weird way or something like that. So I didn't do that. But ultimately she ended up playing beautifully on the performance, just, sort of the normal setup. But yeah, that's that sort of casual sort of background music thing. I'm always interested in that, and I've never had a chance to do much of it. Mm-hmm. I'm not that good of a pianist that I can just go find a piano bar somewhere to let me play or whatever. But that ability to sort of just, throw some music in there that people may or may not pay attention to as sort of a side to the more sort of formal thing. It's interesting.
Well, and some of that too, because there's been composers... a lot of I guess wind ensemble or concert band works will have antiphonal ensembles. There's a piece, I think a John Corleano piece had like an antiphonal marching band.
Okay.
It was concert instruments if I remember correctly, but they were like back there and they would play and then something there, and then that piece was a little bit crazy. But that's it's been done, but on this crazy grand scale. And I guess it's kind of up to composers. Like, this section is for flute quartet, in the foyer, and then that they'll walk into another piece. And I've seen I've heard pieces with like quotations or even an antiphonal like klezmer band, and it's been just wonderful stuff. And I think that was Bernstein. I can't remember which piece, but it was quite effective. But maybe that's the answer. I just need to go write some stuff that has.
Well, and the idea of sort of it's coming back to a little bit of the theatrical element. The idea of sort of indirect storytelling. Mm-hmm. If you had something like, for example, a chamber work that might be performed in the lobby beforehand, that then you have a larger work that quotes from it, or that sort of starts with that and builds out of it, or is built on the same melody, something like that, could be a really interesting thing. And I'm thinking back to Sleep No More and to that environmental theater quality. We even did a little bit of Meet Me in St. Louis, where, we, for that show, before the show, we had like 6 of the cast members go out and sing Christmas carols in the lobby while I played piano. Yeah. Just to kind of set the mood. And Sleep No More, from the time you walk in the building, you're in the atmosphere. Yeah. For a good 15, 20 minutes before you even go into the show. Yeah. Because they have the liberty to sort of take over that whole space. Yeah. So, something like that could be really fascinating. The thing that I think the biggest practical obstacle is making sure that the audience gets it enough that the later bit has its impact, but not necessarily, forcing it. Right. If that makes sense.
Yeah, you wouldn't want to necessarily like parade previous quartet in and then have them, featured. There's
well, but I mean
ways
things
to-
like, for example, the audience typically arrives over the course of 30 minutes.
Yeah.
So, do you have that happen late before the performance? In which case you have a bunch of audience members waiting around and some audience members who walk in the middle of it.
Yeah.
Do you have it start before the first audience member comes in which case it has to either be long or repetitive?
Yeah.
For the point to, those kind of questions.
Yeah.
Or do you just put it somewhere in the middle and live with the assumption that some audience members aren't going to get it?
Yeah.
That kind of thing is really what I'm, that's the practical part of it. That's always a challenge to sort of solve.
Yeah. Well, that's, trial and error.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and that's the other thing, I've started to become more interested in interesting failures recently.
Sure.
There was a while where I was, for me personally, and with the work that I was doing and the art that I was doing, where I felt like playing it safe.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had good success playing it safe. The shows that I've done have been well received, and the actors have enjoyed working on it, and all of that. But part of me wants to try something that there's a serious risk of something going, badly wrong. And that's sort of what we're doing with this chamber thing. I think we're still playing it safe a little bit because we're playing to our strengths for the most part. We're doing stuff that we sort of know how to do. And right now our audience is mostly friendly people.
Yeah.
But, it's a little bit of a risk in that we don't know if it's going to be successful. We don't know if we're going to have a draw outside of friends and family. We don't know if we're going to be able to fill up performers regularly. Yeah. Those kind of, there is some risk element in meeting that commitment, which is kind of cool and kind of exciting.
That's one of the things that got me the most excited about, because, the few people that were gung-ho about it right away, piano's pretty safe for any sort of musical thing.
Right.
It's in keyboard or piano is in pretty much everything.
Right.
Or it could reasonably be added. But the other folks, a guitarist, a soprano sax player, a singer.
Absolutely.
To meaningfully juxtapose those things, not to give away the secret or anything, but there is some of it where it's like, well, I want to see if this will work.
Yeah.
I want to see if I put a guitar playing a cello or a guitar arrangement of a cello piece next to a cellist playing
something
with
else,
some piano music.
Right.
Is that going to... Because some of the people in our audience were musicians, but not all of them, which was really... I was very excited for.
Right.
Because I was thinking, well, the first one, most of the audience was performers for a later piece.
Right.
And that was a really cool environment to get those folks involved. But... this last one, I was like, well, this will be more telling.
Right.
These people that don't really have a musical background, are they going to think this is completely off the wall and they don't get it at all? Or are they going to be like, oh, this was done well, and I would come see this again. I would see, what are they going to put next to something next time? Right.
I think maybe something to consider going forward with something like that is to sort of highlight it, to make a point of it in a way. One of the things that I'm really interested in seeing us do as we go forward is not only trying to make new points or trying to do things in a different way, but trying to sort of explain to the audience why. And that's one of the reasons why I really want to get the performers invested as far as giving a little bit of a presentation or in the format of the program notes, because, for example, I'm curious I was curious from Blake's perspective. Of course, he wasn't able to perform with us, but why in his program notes for his guitar arrangement of a piece for cello did he spend so much time talking about how idiomatic this piece is for cello without ever mentioning why he's playing it on guitar? Yeah. As an example. And I would have been really interested in that question. Why is it that if this piece is such a great fit on this one instrument, why is it that you feel like putting it on this other instrument is worth doing, is important? Yeah. Because I'm sure there's a reason. Yeah. But that kind of question, or if we're trying, like for example, if there's a weird experimental piece, if you got up there and said, I wrote this piece for alto flute and bass clarinet, and as far as I can tell, there has never been a duet for these two pieces before, so this is an experiment. Let's see what happens.
Yeah.
Tell me what you think at the end.
Yeah.
That kind of thing, where then it's clear to the audience a little bit that this is about more than just you sit there and listen and we pick pieces that we like and we put it up there.
Yeah.
Those kind of if we're going to push some boundaries, I'd like to bring the audience along in a way.
Yeah.
And invite them in that way.
Yeah, I think that's one of the best things we can do is be transparent about it.
Yeah.
Because some people are so used to the format of this is the audience, this is the performers, this is what you get, and that's it. Once it's over, we go home and don't ever talk about it.
Right.
I think that's the few words beforehand can really make it clear that like we're trying a different format, not abandoning it, because it is at the end of the day some people playing and some people not, but
right.
Like you said, bring them along. I think that's important. That is definitely what I want to do.
One of the things that we're sort of fighting against is the audience as just passive receptor.
Yeah.
There like you said, there is a little bit of that element because they're certainly not playing.
Right.
But if we can get the audience invested intellectually, emotionally, physically, somehow, I think that creates the more powerful experience that we're looking for.
Mm-hmm.
So that's definitely something to think about as we forge ahead and as we continue to try new things.
Mm-hmm.
So the how to do that.
Yeah.
And we've talked about some things. We've talked about different spaces. We've talked about different formats, that kind of thing. I wonder if we should try theming a little bit more tightly.
Yeah.
As we gain momentum and as the theme becomes obvious.
Yeah.
Month to month. I don't think necessarily they all need to be that way, but like for example, it might make sense in October to do something that is particularly Halloween themed, or in December to do something that's holiday themed, or something like that. Could be another way to sort of get the audience to think about things.
Yeah.
To have that sort of tight grouping, as opposed to this is what we could put together this month.
Right.
which is what the first two have been, and that's what they were going to be.
Yeah. I think that's fine. But I think as we go, and hopefully this will fall in performers' ears, like, because I know there are performers that are thinking this way, and they're like, man, I wish I just had a place to play. I wish there was a place where if I wanted to, I could go play the piece and then talk for 5 minutes about why it was so important that I spend an hour every single day working on 5 measures of this piece. Or what this composer means, or what this movement means, or what the context was historically. That's something that's really cool that you listen to a history professor talk about why something is important in a history class, maybe you're less interested than like, oh yeah, my friend over here had this happen, or has this relative, and or has this cultural background, and that's why this piece is. You're going to listen to that and actually accept what it is.
Right.
It's not just like rhetoric that you're going to spit out on a quiz later.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think I have some ideas after we're done with this recording, because we don't necessarily want to throw them out before we've had a chance to discuss them.
Right.
But some ideas for ways to nudge a little bit in that direction. But the challenge too, I think, is we want to push the envelope, but we don't want to push it so far so fast that we make people uncomfortable.
Right.
We talked about this at our initial meeting. We want the performers to get up and talk to the audience. We want them to have that back and forth, but some people are less comfortable with that.
Right.
And so we want to make sure that we set sort of a reasonable boundary that doesn't scare people off who are nervous about it, but that encourages them to get involved and encourages the performers who are more invested in that, who are more excited about it, to do more of that.
Yeah.
Definitely. So.
Well, let's see. Thinking of what we've got next. I mean, I will always put out an open call for performers. I know we need some brass folks.
I have a trombone player friend of mine who is moving back into town who has expressed some interest.
Sweet.
And he's a master's degree in trombone. He knows what he's doing. He's expressed interest. He hasn't officially signed on, but I've kind of filled him in on the whole thing.
Okay.
But yeah, for sure. And assuming this is going to be dropped before our next performance, that date is July 21st, I think. Let me check that before I say that. Yeah, July 21st. That will be back at Kidville, I assume.
So this is interesting. Same location will be a different name at that time.
Oh, okay.
It will then be listed as Inspired, and I will make sure and put all sorts of information about that up.
Yeah.
July 1, it will be changing.
All right. And then, of course, we have our Facebook and Instagram. If anyone listening to this who is maybe not a performer but wants to hear more about it, or is a performer and wants to start getting connected and see what we're about, we have a Facebook fan page, Woodlands Chamber Music Project, and we have a Instagram account as well. And of course, if you're friends with one of us and you want to get involved as a performer, then we're happy to add you to the Facebook group. Or if you know someone who is a performer who's done stuff with us, then we have a Facebook group. We'd love to have you involved.
Yeah, please share. Please reach out to us. Like, send me a Facebook message or whatever. Message the Chamber Music Group on Instagram if that's your deal.
I think you can do it on Facebook too.
Yeah.
Direct message the page.
Yeah. So if you just want a little bit more information, or just at the end of the day, it's gonna be best if you just come check out what we're doing and meet us. And if you hate it, you never have to come back, but you probably won't because it's been really, really fun.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Well, we got right at an hour, so I think that's pretty good.
Let's call that
for our first one.
Yeah.
All right.
We were all over the map on topics, but it was fun. It was good to talk about.
It's definitely we've covered some theater, some education, some
Absolutely.
singing. But thanks Robert for being on.
You're very welcome. It's been fun.